Welcome on in, ladies and gentlemen. Three bold takes. Today we do have a special guest. Clint Lamb has joined the show with us to discuss a little bit more on Alabama and the transfer portal and things of that nature. So, Clint, I appreciate you joining the show. For those of you that don't know, Clint does work for On3 Sports and is an analyst for the Bama On Line YouTube channel, putting out content all the time on there. So, if you haven't, go ahead and subscribe to them and check their content out as well. Clint, thank you again for joining.
Yeah, absolutely, fellas. It's going to be fun. College football's changing pretty drastically, pretty rapidly. So anytime you're able to kind of hop on somewhere and hash it out a little bit, I think it's a good time.
So this has been a very interesting offseason in college football with the retirement of Nick Saban, the greatest college football coach in the history of the game by many people. I don't think too many people would argue with that. And if you do, I'd love to hear why. But regardless, um, college football in and of itself, the head coaching position starting to change. Obviously, with Saban gone and now Harbaugh leaving to go to the pros, like, what does that mean moving forward in the game of college football as some of these older heads are starting to kind of move on? What does that kind of mean moving forward?
Well, I think you're already starting to get more parity with the way things were set up, even though it was, for the most part, it was still, most of the same programs. Ohio State was always in the conversation, Alabama, Georgia, Oregon, most of the time. So a lot of your big time, big name programs, they were involved in the conversation already. But going to a 12-team playoff, the transfer portal, NIL, all of that is having a major impact. But then also losing what was pretty much an automatic obstacle for most teams that wanted to win a national championship. If Kirby wanted to get one, he needed to get past Alabama. If you were one of these other coaches and, Dabo Sweeney at Clemson, you need to beat Alabama in the national title game to be able to win. So it was a constant thing. It felt like every single year Alabama was, in the conversation. And it was almost like when they moved to a 4-team playoff from the BCS era, it was essentially who's going to be the other three teams because, every year seemingly until 2019, Alabama was in it and they missed it 2 times in 10 years. So granted, there were times where Alabama was in that conversation of will they make it, but your assumption going into the year probably was okay, who's going to be the other three teams. Now it's not as much of an automatic from that standpoint, but then you've got the 12-team playoff coming, which kind of compensates. And I think with Kalen DeBoer and where he's going to have the program, they're going to continue to be in the conversation of making the playoffs, and we'll have to see if how competitive they are once they get there. But it is going to be vastly different. I think Kirby's smart at this point. He's the automatic top head coach in college football. From there, the conversation gets really interesting. I think there's arguments to be made for a lot of people. I think Jim Harbaugh would have been in that conversation, even though still I don't know that I would have put him automatically at number two. I think he probably would have had as good of an argument as most of these other guys. But from there, who do you put at three? Who do you put at four? Where does Dabo sit based off of where Clemson's been trending? Is he still considered a top 5 coach in college football? So the conversation around the sport has really never been more interesting. And because it's like, you had Peyton Manning and you had Tom Brady and you had Drew Brees, all these quarterbacks in the NFL within a few years of each other, a 5-year period, start to retire. It's like, okay, who's going to be that next wave of guys? And with coaches starting to move on, whether it be to the NFL or retirement, you're starting to ask the same thing with college coaches.
Yeah, Clint, you hit on it. You talked about, Kirby's kind of positioned himself as the clear-cut number one guy, but the field's kind of open after that. And my take on it when Saban retired was we're kind of hitting a situation where I think college football has been, for lack of a better term, beaten over the head for a decade and a half by Alabama's dynasty. I mean, it's pretty much you hit on it. They're there every year, and it was kind of a pre-on conclusion they were at least going to be in the playoff. Do you think we're about to hit back to maybe a BCS style era, especially with NIL and transfer portal, where we're going to start seeing different guys be able to do one title, maybe two titles, cement their legacy? Because I think, during the Saban era, I think guys like Mark Richt, Les Miles are the first two that come to mind for me on guys who missed out on really being able to elevate their status strictly because Saban was an obstacle for them they couldn't get over. Do you think we're going to enter more of an open field where more guys and more programs are winning titles, or do you see a path where maybe Kalen DeBoer and Alabama reestablish consistent dominance like the Saban era, or Kirby Smart does that out at Georgia? What are you seeing as far as the field when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think it's a lot more wide open. And the reason being is you're going to see teams take big swings or programs take big swings. You know, like Texas A&M tried it a couple of years ago on the recruiting trail, spending a ton of money, try to position themselves to get the ball rolling with, winning a national championship and then kind of take it from there. It failed miserably. I do think NIL from an ego standpoint, young kids, a lot of money, conversations start being had, people start comparing what they got, and you can cause some real issues. I do think that that's something that coaches need to be able to navigate within their own locker room. But I do think that it's going to be like the NFL. Like, the Rams, they sell off, all their assets, all their future first round picks to win that Super Bowl. And they haven't been all that great since, but they won the Super Bowl. And so for a fan base, I could totally see more teams selling out. Right now it feels like Ole Miss is really trying to make a move. They've been in that position where they've won 10 games in the regular season for the first time. Kiffin did it 2 years ago, and then he did it this year. Now they're kind of trying to get to that next level. And what can this program be if we can get over that hump, win a national championship, or at the very least make it be in those final two teams before it's all said and done? And, I think a lot of teams are going to be doing that. And through that, you'll still have the blue bloods. I still think Georgia is going to be winning some national titles under Kirby Smart. I think Steve Sarkisian in Texas, they're going to be a major problem. They already are a major problem. But now coming to the SEC, they could. I know that it's Georgia and it's Kirby Smart right now, and it really should be. But I don't think they have a lock on becoming the next Alabama as much as some people probably think that they do, because I think Texas, with their NIL money, with their program history, I think they got the right head coach in place, who's building the right culture within that program. Now they're spending quite a bit of money because they have money, but at the same time, they're staying about as level headed about it as you possibly could. And I think that's going to make them very competitive moving forward. So you'll have teams like that are winning. Georgia might win, a couple, 2 out of 3, 2 out of 4. Texas might, win 1 or 2. But I think for the most part, you're going to see more parity than you've seen in the last, close to 20 years.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned it earlier. But when you're looking at Harbaugh walking away, he walks away to go get an NFL job, something that he was kind of coveting and kind of removing himself from the allegations at Michigan. But Saban, when you look at why Saban walked away, what, and in your expert opinion, what would be your opinion on this is the reason Saban walked away? A lot of people have rumors, a lot of people have their own speculation or opinions. What do you think?
Speaking candidly, I think he has been very, very close. Now, he has not said that publicly. How can he? When he was not ready to step away, you can't be honest about that, because teams are negatively recruiting against you and using that against you, and you're hurting your own program by having those rumors exist. And so you've got to act like you're in it for the long haul and you're not going anywhere, and you don't know what you're going to do with the next stages of your life once you retire. He was saying all those things publicly, and you can't really blame him for that in hindsight. But I think he was a lot closer based off of people that I've talked to. I'm not saying that it was a foregone conclusion that was going to happen this offseason, but I think he was. I think he was close last year. I think he was close this year. And I was kind of thinking, post 2024 would have been my guess, is especially if they could have won if they would have won the national championship this year, I would have been less surprised. Even though in some ways, in hindsight, with the way they talked about it after the game, and this might upset some Alabama fans, but I think it's the God's honest truth. I think Georgia was their national championship this year. I think they really wanted to keep Georgia from three-peating. All the players were talking about this was the number one team in the country. We wanted to prove that we could beat this team, and they were able to do that. And it's just I could go back and pull clips and stuff. I was worried about it because it's like, hey, you still got at least 2 more, or at least 1 more game, potentially 2. But at the same time, it's, I think when he started going through the hiring process, and he realized, I mean, the season had already taken its toll on him. He said he was tired after the season. You start going through this process, and it's like Travaris Robinson, his contract is up for renewal. You know, there's already speculation that he could be trying to either get the defense coordinator job under Saban, or he could be jumping ship to Georgia. What's that going to cause as far as roster management? What's that's going to cause as far as, you know, just next steps of the process? That's another position coach that's coming open. That's a huge part of what you do from a recruiting standpoint. I think it just reached a level for him where he's like, I just don't know that I got it in me to the degree that I will need to. And he's always said, if I can't give it my absolute all, I'm not going to give it, because, you know, that's just not how he's operated. I really do think, I mean, he was interviewing guys all the way up until he retired or announced his retirement and told the team. He claims 5 minutes before he walked into the meeting, he was still trying to decide, you know, what kind of speech am I going to give? I really do think that he was conflicted with it, but I think it was just the exhaustion factor of all that. It's not just in season stuff anymore. It's the headaches that come out of the season, and really there is no break or time for rest. I think that ultimately, as he was going through this process, is what made him decide, I do think it's time for me to step away because I can't give it what I used to give it.
Right.
Yeah, and kind of one last thing here as we pan away from Saban and moving forward, it seems like in college football, it's kind of taken a shift in the style of head coach that it takes to be successful, right? It seems like it used to be the defensive, coordinators that turn head coach were always it set up for a better position long term than offensive coordinators that would be elevated. With the likes of Sarkisian and Lane Kiffin that are poised to make huge moves moving forward as head coaches, do you see that trend continuing in the offensive minds being more successful moving forward as head coaches than defensive minds?
Well, it's so fascinating because, you know, I liked where Alabama's program was heading. It seemed like they had gotten more. I mean, they had a lot more finesse, a lot smaller, whether it be defensively, offensively, the offensive line smaller, more athletic. And then you watch Georgia win back to back, kind of still doing to a degree what Nick Saban and Alabama had always done. And I think Saban figured out, okay, this can still work. In fact, it's kind of, all these defenses are getting smaller. If we have bigger, more powerful guys and we're hammering the football at people, I mean, that's not something that you see every week. That physical style of game, you're used to playing sideline to sideline. You got to have athletes. It's not as physical. It's more, like I said, finesse and just, hammering the football at somebody. I think that was going to end up being very effective. And we saw it. I think Alabama's identity this season, even though they kind of struggled in that transition back, I think they were only going to continue to get better with that as Saban started getting more of those style of players back into the system. But you saw a team that probably shouldn't have been in the college football playoff picture based off of what we saw early in the year. They ended up, being fairly close to a national championship appearance and could have won it had they made it. So it's, I liked where the program was heading. I think under Kalen DeBoer, it's getting more back the other direction, like the way that he is going to implement things offensively. It's the smaller, more athletic offensive lineman that's going to be asked to do a ton of different things, throws a lot at opposing defenses. But I think that that's where everybody else is. And what I will say about Kalen DeBoer compared to Nick Saban is that he's more comfortable in that lane. Nick Saban was out of his comfort zone when he was, becoming more offense oriented, and the defense was really suffering as a result. I thought the reason I was so high on Dan Lanning as a potential candidate when Nick Saban first announced his retirement was the fact that having that defensive minded head coach, that he's always going to keep his defense in mind. It's the same thing that Kirby Smart has done. Kirby Smart is a defensive minded head coach. Jim Harbaugh is offensive minded, but he understands through his, time in the NFL, there needs to be balance, and you need to make sure that you're taking care of both sides of the football. And who's been the last three national champions? Georgia twice and Michigan. So I think that there's something to be said about kind of zigging when everyone else is zagging, but with the Lane Kiffins, the Steve Sarkisians, the Kalen DeBoers of the world, Josh Heupel and what he's done at Tennessee, it's a different style, and I think that as far as if you're comfortable with that, I think you can have quite a bit of success. And I do think just Kalen DeBoer understands the importance of balance, and I think it's still having Nick Saban around and in his ear I do think there will be an emphasis on not only, I mean, he obviously likes to create balance, whether it be run pass, even though they seem very pass heavy, which they do throw more than they run. But I think they're very strategic in how they use their run game, and it's very efficient and effective when they do. So I do think there's going to be an emphasis on that. Being in the SEC, Lane Kiffin, I think, learned, you can't be too pass happy. Like with Matt Corral, he was slinging the football around as much as anybody in the country. And they've gotten to where they're a lot more run oriented. And I think that with where they're trying to take things, that's the best route for them to go. But there also needs to be an emphasis on the defensive side of the football. And I think Lane Kiffin's trying to figure that aspect of it out as well. But yeah, having the offensive minded head coaches, you don't have to worry about them leaving, obviously. And so you build your team around your offense, and then you just fight, tooth and nail to get a complementary defense. Because if you can do that, you got something that very few programs in college football do. But you have the Lincoln Rileys of the world who can't seem to figure that stuff out. And so we'll kind of have to see how that ends up, playing out. But yeah, I would say that would, if I was building a program, I think it would be built around the passing game with where the game is at right now, but also got to keep those other factors in mind.
Awesome. Well, this is part 1 of a 4-part series. So if you like what you see, guys, go and check out the other parts as well that will be released this week. Clint, I appreciate it, brother.
Absolutely, fellas. Appreciate you guys.